What's good, YouTube? Svenny-D here. I hope everyone's had an amazing week, and even better, I hope everybody is not dealing with snow and blizzards and whiteouts and all that good stuff as we are in the northeastern part of the country or the southeastern part of Canada. It's been pretty wicked, pretty wild the last few days. We went from it being 73 degrees last Friday when I left work to 2 days ago, I was driving 30 miles an hour in a huge line of cars. Everyone had their blinkers on. You know, we were on the highway at 65 miles per hour. Everyone usually goes like 70 to 75. Not that day. It was awful out. So hopefully you guys are having better luck. It seems like the weather is going to be breaking up here in New York in the next couple of days, so we do have that to look forward to. But I wanted to do a quick video on the tragedy that had occurred yesterday. A plane was flying from LaGuardia to Texas. I believe they were going to Houston or Dallas. And unfortunately, from what I know, one of the engines in the plane had actually exploded. And it's a really tragic event. One person unfortunately lost their lives. I don't believe there were any more. Last I knew it was only one person. Apparently the engine, as it exploded, some of the debris had pierced a window in the plane. And I don't want to go into details or anything, but usually if you pierce the window of an airplane or even just the outer shell or hull of a plane, you're going to have an immediate drop in pressure, and that hole is going to create a suction cup, so to say. We've probably all seen it and heard about it in movies where it's extremely exaggerated, but in real life, a similar event would occur. So, as you guys might or might not know, I do fly internationally a lot for work. I typically fly to Korea, South Korea, of course, or China. I've flown into Japan, but it's been those three countries thus far. And I wanted to tell you guys about some of my scariest flight experiences. It hasn't been anything too bad, but they've been pretty frightening. So when I started traveling internationally, I had only flown one time previously, and that was from New York to Florida, and then a Florida to Baltimore to New York flight on the way back. That was for my honeymoon when I had gotten married a couple of years ago. My first ever flight was from Buffalo to Detroit, and then my first ever flight for work was to Detroit, and then from Detroit to South Korea. We flew into Seoul and then went from Seoul to Busan, which is on the southernmost part of South Korea. That was my first ever flight, and it actually went really smooth, except on the way back, we had flown from Korea to Japan, and then Japan, Detroit, Detroit, Buffalo. On the way back, I had a cold, so I had a very small earache, and as you're kind of climbing up and the pressure's decreasing, your ears start to pop. If you ever have an earache, make sure you have something to chew on, like bubblegum, because it was extremely painful. Like to the point where I was sitting there, mouth wide open like that, almost the entire flight. And these are like 13, 14, 15 hour flights. And like, it was embarrassing to sit there with my mouth wide open. So I just sat there with my hand covering over my mouth as I have it wide open, just to kind of relieve that pressure. But I would say the scariest situations I've ever had in a plane, the first one would have been in January of 2017. I was flying from Buffalo to Detroit. This was getting ready for a China flight, and when we were getting ready to take off, there was this really loud boom, right? It was a smaller plane similar to a 737 that this recent tragedy had occurred in. There was a really loud boom, and all this, you could hear the engine sputter out, and it was really cold this morning. It was like -15 with the wind chill, and apparently the engine was malfunctioning. The left engine was malfunctioning, and they could not get it to start back up. So we had sat there in the runway for about 2 hours with no details at all, aside from the captain coming on and saying that they were trying to get a contractor up there to look at this. Finally, to make the long story short, they had gotten a contractor to manually start the engine. So the engine could be manually started, but it could not be manually started using the typical ignition process. So if the engine would have went out in midair, we would have only been relying on one engine, and you wouldn't have been able to restart it. So it was really fucking scary, and you could tell that the engine that had this issue, you could tell that it had to have been running at like 50% of the power that it should have been, because immediately as we were getting ready to take off, the plane, it really sharply kind of pulled to the left, and you could see the captain steady it out. And then once in the flight, this was only like a 45-minute flight, thankfully, but you could kind of feel the plane, you know, drift and pull. That was really scary, not knowing what was going to happen if this engine would have went out. Like I said, there still was one, and it was a short flight, but nonetheless, I don't want to be in a 15-minute flight if one of the two engines is not working. So that was my first scary experience. My second scary experience was in Buffalo as well. This was in May of 2017, so 4 or 5 months later. This was on another trip to China. We were getting ready to take off. It was a beautiful sunny afternoon, like 70 degrees, and we're in the plane. Everyone got situated. You know, we got taxied around the runway, and we're getting ready to take off, and we started to. And if you've ever flown on a plane before, you know, they speed up pretty damn quickly. They accelerate like that, and then slowly start to lift the plane. Well, we started accelerating, and it got to that point where you knew that any second they were going to start lifting the nose of the plane off the ground. And all of a sudden, the engines went like it's the guy braked. The captain had braked the plane, but we were flying at this point. The front of the plane had actually started to lift off the ground, and all of a sudden the engines made this really loud noise, and you just jolted forward from brakes and from the plane braking so quickly. And this was really scary. We weren't technically off the ground, just partially, but everyone's like screaming, wondering what the hell's going on. And what had happened was the traffic control had noticed a big flock of birds coming and approaching the runway right where our plane was getting ready to head to. So they had what is referred to as an aborted takeoff. That was pretty damn scary, but fortunately it was a pretty quick situation. We didn't leave the ground, but it was still one of those times where it was like, I hope to God nothing's wrong with the plane, because after this happens, he just swings back around, takes off, and, you know, on our way we go. Some honorable mentions. So if you've ever flown long distances or ever flown through a storm, you probably know what it feels like when you get that roller coaster feeling, when the plane will be flying and you'll hit like a really weird air pocket and it'll just drop a couple thousand feet in a few seconds. And the first couple of times I flew, I didn't know what this was, and I wasn't familiar with this occurrence. So every time it happens, like, it feels like the plane is just falling out of the sky and you're just gonna come crashing down to your death. Now I'm used to it, so when it happens, it's kind of like I'm on alert, but it doesn't make me nervous. It's just like it takes me a second or two to be like, okay, you know, I know what's happening, whatever. And then turbulence. One of the times when I was coming back from South Korea, we hit a horrible storm. Usually turbulence will last for like a couple minutes here and there. This was like 4 hours straight, and it wasn't your typical turbulence where everything's rocking. It was turbulence where like the plane was like violently shaking. That really sucked. All in all, I was deathly afraid of flying. I would never have imagined in my life that I would ever get on an airplane until I went on my honeymoon and then got this job. It's actually really not that bad. The international flights, for what they are, for being stuck in a plane for 15 hours, they're mildly comfortable. You know, the seats are what you would expect. The thing I really enjoy is the rum and cokes and the movie selection. You have hundreds of movies to select, and a lot of times when I get on there, they have movies that are currently out in theaters, so you kind of get like an early an early preview of the movie. That's pretty cool. But if you guys have any crazy, scary flight experiences of your own, definitely leave it in the comments below. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. In the next week or two, I am going to officially launch my channel with regular content and such like that. So if you guys have any suggestions, feedback, recommendations, as I always say, definitely let me know. But anyways, until next time, Svenny-D is signing out, and I will catch you guys soon. Peace!